Hi, everybody. My name is Jessie Haas. I'm a program manager with PEP Partners, and we are here today to discuss the most common PPSAT and Scoresheet mistakes. For those of you who have been following along the last couple of weeks, this is the third part in a three-part series. So the last one called Evaluator Essentials. And we selected our webinars from 2016 and 2017 that had been the most popular, meaning they had had the most attendance and the most engagement. And instead of making new content for you all, we decided why not recycle some old content and offer it again for those who were unable to attend the first time it was offered or who had continued questions. So that's why we're all here today. Again, thank you for spending some time with us. I know it's early in the morning for some of you. While you're looking at the agenda, I do want to share a couple of housekeeping matters. First of all, I do these webinars from my home. I do have 2 kids and 2 dogs. I do try to keep it quiet, but if you hear anything, that's what it is, and I apologize in advance. Everybody else is muted, and you won't be unmuted for any reason. That helps us maintain call quality. Nonetheless, we do want to make sure that we get your feedback on various items. And so there are a couple of slides in here where you'll see something like your turn, and then there's a question. And I would love for you all to use your comment or your question box to answer those questions. And then I will verbally report them out so that you can hear how other people are responding to that specific topic. And I think that's all the housekeeping items that I have. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I wanted to start by saying, obviously, the title of this webinar is Our Most Common Mistakes with the PPSAT and the Scoresheet. And we just want to acknowledge right off the bat that mistakes happen. To err is to be human, I think is what the quote is. We certainly know that being an evaluator means synthesizing a lot of information, and it's a very complex role. We know mistakes will happen. We also know that on our end, there are times that we could be more clear. Just as you all are synthesizing a lot of information, we also do our best to present it well, but we may not always do that perfectly. So mistakes happen on our end as well. But why do some of these mistakes happen? Again, volume of information, certainly, and also lack of clarity. But we find a lot of times that groups or history can sometimes cloud current processes and how an evaluator or group of evaluators is performing the PPSAT. For example, some people are unaware that changes have been made, or maybe they're unwilling to change. And so these past processes cloud our current processes. Related local groups may have preferences or opinions about certain elements of the PPSAT. And often without will intent, these preferences and opinions grow and end up replacing our true protocols. One key way to avoid mistakes is to stay on top of news and information. Read emails from us. I do try to keep the emails for evaluators and instructors to once per month, but in those monthly emails, I will highlight if there have been any changes or let people know that certain changes haven't been widely adopted yet and to pay careful attention. If you miss emails, you can go into the resource library. All you need to do is select recent communications from one of the drop-down menus, and it will show all of the emails sent to evaluators and instructors in the last several months. So you can always check that. We do recommend checking the resource library generally on a regular basis. Again, you can sort by most recently added. So if you just want to look at things that came through in the last 3 or 4 months, you can do that. At least check the resource library and check your manual before you conduct an evaluation event. I do want to say that over 5,400 team evaluations were conducted in 2016. I didn't pull 2017 numbers for today. This was a webinar that was offered last year. But the good news is that despite offering so many team evaluations, we only have a few mistakes reported to us or mistakes that sort of rise to the level of being important. So that's great. Right away, I have a your turn slide here. So again, this is when I want to hear from other people in the audience. Use your comment or your question box. And I want to know from you, what are the best ways to stay informed and up to date? Do you prefer emails? Do you participate in the volunteer leader forum, which has been very quiet lately, but we are going to be launching a new version of it next year that's a lot more robust and will help people stay up to date with each other via that forum. Do you peruse the website on your own? And I also want to hear from you, how can we do a better job communicating information to keep you up to date? Is there another method that we're not thinking of? So go ahead. I'll give everybody a minute or two to type those in, and I'll read them out as they come in. So lots of people are saying emails, and it sounds like most people are reading the emails as they come in, which probably does make a lot of sense. It's always easier to stay up to date a few minutes at a time rather than trying to read a bunch later. Somebody else mentioned that they do peruse the website on their own, so that's great. And I do want to be really clear that we get lots of feedback from our evaluators and instructors about various things they'd like to see improved, specifically around the PPSAT or around the score sheet. One example is, we got a lot of feedback about the score sheet being too small of print, right? So those kinds of changes we try to make for you on the fly by creating, in that case, a larger print score sheet. Now you have two choices. But when there's other things that people want, we've gotten feedback, we'd like to have a checkbox so we can let you know when we use an experienced assistant, for example. Well, we're a little hesitant to make those changes on the fly because, of course, anytime you change the score sheet, then you have to make sure 500 plus team evaluators are aware of even small changes. So as we get feedback from you all about things to change, we try not to push lots of changes out in those emails. We try to wait and do changes once a year or every 2 years if they're going to have a lot of impact, and then announce them that way. So I use the emails mostly that you all are mentioning just to highlight changes that have happened recently, or to let you know when, as I said, changes haven't been adopted in the way that we anticipated. So no more comments are coming in, so I am going to move on. But if you have any further feedback, you can continue to type it in, and I'll get to those at the end. Speaking of experienced assistants, I just want to reiterate to people that experienced assistants should only be used when there are cases of familiarity or when an evaluator is unable to do a hands-on portion due to an injury or temporary disability, or the evaluator is not comfortable enough with the specific species being evaluated to do the hands-on portion. So essentially, there's 3 reasons that an evaluator is allowed to use an experienced assistant to do the hands-on portions. Anytime an experienced assistant does the hands-on portion, the team is only eligible for a predictable rating, period, no matter what. The team could get all 2s on every single exercise. They are still predictable if an experienced assistant does the hands-on portion. We get this confusion frequently where an experienced assistant is used and the evaluator is upset to see that we changed the rating from complex to predictable for a team of theirs. So I did want to highlight that. One thing I want to point out on the familiarity piece with experienced assistants is that many evaluators will evaluate a team with whom they are habitually familiar. They use an experienced assistant and they apply the predictable score. They believe and have said to the team and to us that they are following policy, right? Okay, there was familiarity, now I'm using an assistant, now I'm giving predictable. That's not exactly true. That's still a last resort to use an experienced assistant for the hands-on portion. Remember, the first option when familiarity is present is to have the team evaluate with someone else, even if it means driving a reasonable distance. We don't expect people to drive 4 or 5, 6 hours, but if there is somebody 60 miles up the road, we expect that they go there as a first choice. Simply allowing the predictable is not the first choice. That is the second choice. So I do want to make that clear because that is a mistake we see, again, quite often. We will often hear from evaluators, no, they'll take the predictable because they're so close to the renewal deadline, we don't want them to miss it. Again, as a reminder, handlers are told beginning at 6 months prior to their renewal that they can begin their evaluation process and their renewal process. So there really is no excuse to wait until the end and then try to just use a familiar evaluator and take the predictable score. Lastly, I do want to point out that we found that some experienced assistants have over time been elevated to an evaluator type role, kind of a pseudo evaluator. For example, we found that in some cases, experienced assistants may be greeting the teams, giving all the instructions, and even delivering all or part of the scores. That should not be happening. Or experienced assistants are conducting hands-on portions in situations not outlined as acceptable on the slide. Remember, an experienced assistant has not gone through the team evaluator training protocol, which specifically highlights how to stay safe and how to set handlers up for success through their instructions and things like that. Just because they've attended many evaluations does not make them trained in these facets. You may be a wonderful mentor, but for safety and liability reasons, we need to have only trained evaluators performing these types of things and playing the role of evaluator, except for in those rare circumstances. They can be helpful, but they do not replace our registered team evaluators. Talk a little bit about equipment and special equipment. We have recently seen an uptick in handlers not wishing to commit to one type of equipment for their evaluation or for their visiting. Some have requested that evaluators evaluate them using multiple types of equipment so that they can then kind of go back and forth. Or they're doing one evaluation with one type of equipment, going seeing another evaluator and using a different kind of equipment. And allowing for a handler to mix and match is not acceptable. So evaluators should be aware of that. It is vital for pet partners to document a handler's equipment when it is anything other than a flat collar and leash. Should a handler find themselves involved in an incident and they were not visiting with the equipment as they were evaluated, this could have serious effects on their insurance coverage. So please educate handlers who may come to you with this request that how you evaluate is how you visit. Anytime special equipment is being utilized, you must have an accommodation letter from pet partners outlining the terms the handler agreed to in order to use that special equipment. Special equipment is equipment not noted on the acceptable equipment list, not a flat collar and leash. Please only mark special equipment when it is in fact special equipment. And again, never accept any special equipment without an accompanying accommodation letter from pet partners. What we do sometimes have is evaluators don't want to inconvenience the handler who showed up without an accommodation, and they do it anyway. And then retroactively, sometimes we have to require that they evaluate again. So it actually creates more of an inconvenience than simply, unfortunately, turning them away at the door. A quick note on strollers. Some handlers, due to a disability, request to use a stroller for transport only, say from the distance to their car, from their car to the door of a hospital. We all know some of those hospital parking lots or parking ramps can be huge. This still needs an accommodation. They still need to bring the stroller to the evaluation for an inspection, and they must agree to our infection control protocols, because it is a rare day that a handler with an animal will arrive at the facility door not having been greeted by anybody in the parking lot or vestibules or anything like that. I would like to do another your turn. Do you often have teams show up with unapproved special equipment? How do you avoid it? And I guess related, how do you deal with it? I'll give people a minute to type that in, because we'd love to hear more on how you all deal with special equipment. One person responded that it hasn't happened to her, so lucky her. That's great. I did want to mention, while we're waiting for other comments to come in, that we have recently retooled, and some of you may have heard this if you were on our first webinar, but we recently retooled the automatic communication that all handlers receive upon sign up to an evaluation. So they get an automatic email saying, your sign up is confirmed. Here's some things to remember. They also get an email at 7 days out and a day out. And in all of those emails, we reference, well, at least in the one that upon sign up and the one 2 weeks before or so, that if they have special equipment, they need to request an accommodation. So we try to get out in front of that messaging so that fewer of them are showing up completely unaware that they had to have something approved. Another person mentioned they have not had it happen to us, so that's excellent. And then a final person said that they talked to the handlers prior to testing clarifying requirements. So that's great. Even though we do some automatic messaging, as an evaluator, if you create some templates of your own where you just always tell every handler upon sign up, don't come with unapproved equipment, that can go a long way. Sounds like another person here who does the same thing. They send an email talking about what to expect in the evaluation, list what they must bring, and talk about equipment. So what I'm going to include in my next team evaluator email update that you all said you do like and you receive is I'm going to include that communication that we automatically send out to all handlers from pet partners so that you all can see what goes out in those messages, because we do all that as well. And I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily for both the evaluator and pet partners to send the emails, but at least that way you can structure your messaging around the messaging they're automatically getting from the system. All right, I'm going to move on from this. Oh, one more. I do send an appointment letter myself, and approved equipment reminders in the letter. So I think that person means the slot that the handler has at the evaluation. When they get that, they're also told about approved equipment. So great communication from all of you. Thank you so much. This apparently is no longer as big of an issue as it was in 2016, and maybe that's because a lot of the communication from us and from you all has gotten even better over time. All right, we're moving on to a little bit more about skipped exercises and incomplete score sheets. Generally, there is no need to cross out exercises on the score sheet. As a reminder, any changes to the PPSAT must be approved in advance. So, for example, if somebody says, well, my animal can't do the come when called because it's hard of hearing, unfortunately, that would be an NR for them. They can certainly talk about that matter with us in terms of how we might be able to adjust the PPSAT for them, but that needs to be done in advance and with pet partners' approval. You want to make sure that you're circling both the handler and the animal side, a score on each of those sides, in addition to the overall team score. One other thing that's come up really recently, it wasn't actually in this webinar when we launched it in 2016 or early 2017, is that we're noticing a lot of the comments that our evaluators are writing to handlers aren't really matching the score that they're giving. So they might give the animal a bunch of 2s, but then in their comments, they're talking about stress signals that the animal is giving during a specific exercise. That throws us for a loop because an animal who's showing stress signals shouldn't be receiving a 2 on that exercise. Now, that could just be an interpretation problem on our end. Maybe it is a scoring discrepancy. We don't know. But when we see that, we have an obligation to follow up with evaluators. Did you really mean to give a 2 to this animal or 2 to this handler or 2 for the overall score? Because your comments are saying something different. And remember, the score sheet's a legal document. And if the animal is ever involved in an incident, and let's say it is in an incident on one of those exercises where the comments suggest there's a multiple clustering stress signals, now we're sort of in a problem here. You know, what was right? Was the animal 2? Was it doing really well in that exercise, or was the animal throwing off a bunch of stress signals? We love comments. They're important more for the handler than for us, but we love them because it gives the handler some insight into specific things about that exercise. But be really careful that your comments don't contradict the score that you're giving the team. As a reminder, NA does not mean not applicable. It means not appropriate. So sometimes we see people write NA, as a note, especially maybe around some of the carried exercises or things like that, and just don't use that at all because, again, as an obligation, because it's a legal document, we need to follow up and make sure you didn't mean NA as in not appropriate. Trying to think of any final things about score sheets. We are reviewing score sheets a little bit more carefully now than we used to. And that is not because we trust our evaluators any less than we used to. It's simply that we have a really good system right now online that we are processing team registrations so fast that we're able to spend a little bit of time looking at score sheets. So if you get an email from us saying, hey, just want to make sure of A, B, and C, or did you really mean that? It's just us being careful, adding it to the handler's record. We want to be as safe and as rigorous as we can be. It's not us not believing what you're saying. It's just us wanting the most complete score sheets that we can. I want to talk a little bit about the treats and carry designation as they relate to scores and score sheets specifically. The treat exercise is a vital piece of the PPSAT. Many of our animals may be treat aggressive, and it's not just dogs. So all animals must at least know that you have approached with a treat in your hand in order for us to determine if that treat aggression might be present. If the treat is being declined, the animal must wait patiently until the exercise is over and the evaluator has put the treat away. So you want to have the treat within proximity of the team, even if the team has said they won't be using treats on the visit. As you can imagine, that's because we can't always control whether or not a patient or a client or a staff member is going to have a treat in their hand or in their vicinity. The handler is not required to give a leave it command or any other command if the animal has not made a move towards the treat, so that's not required. During this exercise, if they decline, you would, of course, remind them that they may not allow for clients to ever offer animals treats because we did not evaluate for that skill. And also, please note that if the treat is accepted, it must be given by hand, not dropped on the floor, thrown in the air, or in some cases recently, we've seen that Evaluators are putting it on spoons, which may have something to do with infection prevention and control. Nonetheless, there's no equipment used and no alternative methods used when administering the treat. And so you need to score that. We get a number of score sheets where the treat exercise is not scored because the handler declined it. That's not okay. Carry designation. So a carry means just that the handler chooses to carry their animal during some or most of the exercises where that was an option. You will explain that when the team is on a visit, we will expect them to carry their animal under similar circumstances. An example would be if the animal was carried during the neutral dog exercise. We would expect for the handler, anytime they saw a dog approach, to pick their animal up as they passed that dog by. Carry is not noted if the handler merely picks up an animal for the convenience, for example, of the staggered gesturing person or the crowd. So if a short lift is used to help facilitate client-animal interaction, that is not a carry designation. Don't mark it as such. That's just for convenience. In that particular situation, it is not for safety. We're almost done here, folks, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. We just want to remind everybody that the evaluation is not an obedience trial. This is a lot that we hear. This is a situation that we actually hear a lot from evaluators, because we'll hear from them complain that the animal was a step in front of or a step behind the handler, and that's why they scored them a certain way on the exercise, or the animal changed sides, went out for a walk. But none of that is really involved in what we're looking for necessarily. As long as the animal is attentive to the handler and does not require a tight leash, using those examples, or the handler to use the leash as a tool for directing, it might not earn them a 2, but it should not earn them a not ready. So we actually hear directly from evaluators that they're treating our PPSAT like an obedience trial, which is not what we're looking for. The feedback also comes directly from our handlers. Many will tell us that they felt the expectations were so high, or they did not feel that they were set up for success. For example, an evaluator may think having an open bowl of dog treats at the sign-in desk will kind of cull the crowd and give them some data on the team. Well, would that really happen on a visit? Maybe, but also a lot of times on visits, treats are in drawers. They're in a decanter with a top on top of the actual bowl. We're not really looking to have our evaluation be a series of gotcha moments. And we don't want our handlers to feel like that, because that's in direct contradiction to what our coursework and our manual says. We say that we want this to simulate a visit, not simulate a obedience trial. One other reminder in terms of setting up teams for success is that you need to pass on score sheets to the teams. Okay, if you want a copy for your own records, snap a photo of it, but it's not your job to upload the score sheets for the handlers or somehow give them to us. We don't like that, because if you were to lose them or forget about it, now we have an upset handler. We would much rather have the handlers take responsibility for their own volunteerism. If they lose the score sheet or forget to turn it in within the appropriate amount of time, we'd rather have that be on them than on you. But moreover, they need those score sheets, to be able to see how they did and what they can work on. That includes not ready score sheets. We have a number of evaluators who don't think NR score sheets need to be passed along. They do. In fact, sometimes, depending on how far the team got through the PPSAT, NR score sheets can be the most critical ones that teams get, so that they can keep track of what it is that they need to work on. And I'm going to stop there and do another your turn. And I know I had a question come in while I was talking, so I'll try to get that. But now we've gone through some of the most common mistakes that relate to the PPSAT generally, and also as they relate to the exercises, and also as they relate to the score sheet. So which of these mistakes have you made? Or if you don't make very many mistakes, bravo to you, but which do you find the hardest to avoid? And I'm scrolling back up and read some of the ones that have come through. So one person said, in your partner's demonstration video, you allow a pad or a carpet for a dog to sit or down on. I was surprised to see that. Is that allowed? It is. It is allowed. And it's referenced in the manual if you want to take a look at that. But it's usually allowed when there's particularly slippery surfaces where a dog may slide unintentionally. So that is okay to use during the evaluation, so that you're not scoring an animal that they can't stay in a sit when their paws might just be sliding because of the surface. I got a question on the treat exercise here. So does this mean that the treat should be visible to the animal on the part of the evaluator? Yes, I think so. I think the animal should, obviously it's going to smell generally that it's in your hand. But as you all know, particularly with canines, they're very aware when you walk and they hear the crinkle of that bag or whatever you have it in. We do want to make sure they know that you have it. You don't need to wave it in front of them so that they see it, but you should be able to incorporate it in such a way that it sees you walking to that table, reaching into a bag, holding it in your hand, and reapproaching the team, and then asking, may I give your animal a treat? Good question. If you don't think the animal saw it, but you did your best to ensure that it saw it, then don't worry about it. I hope I'm being clear that we try our best to make sure they see it. So one person said our score sheets are just too cumbersome and too long. Can you please simplify? As one lone evaluator doing everything, it takes so long to choose the options. Can you consolidate and simplify? I certainly can lodge that in what we call our kind of curriculum and score sheet queue. We do keep track of all of the feedback from our evaluators on what they like and don't like about both our coursework and our score sheets. Again, that's something that I was mentioning earlier. We won't change quickly, because imagine if we just decided, well, a couple of evaluators want it to be shorter, let's make it shorter and roll it out. It's going to be real difficult for everybody to now relearn a whole other set of score sheets. But I certainly can put that in our queue. It might be helpful for me to know a little bit what is more cumbersome about them. Yes, they are long. There are a lot of exercises. But it'd be helpful for me to know why they feel so cumbersome. Is it just the length, or is it you don't feel you can score them in the moment? I do know a lot of evaluators will just circle the numbers as they go along. And then, of course, they'll sit down, recheck their score sheets at the end, add their comments in. And that way, during the evaluation, they're not feeling pressured to somehow complete every single element of the score sheet perfectly. They're just giving themselves enough so that when they go back for 2 or 3 minutes on the end, they can do it appropriately. I'm just reading these, so there are a few more that come in. So somebody said, when an evaluation has to be stopped, do we not cross out the remaining pages and write across each test step? Certainly that's okay. If you want to do that, we'll certainly know that if you don't, if they're just not completed, we know they're not completed, whether they're crossed out or not. And we're not seeing the NR score sheets always anyway. I suppose there's a possibility that a handler could forge and go in and complete those. Luckily, we don't have a lot of instances of that. But I think in that case, if you want to cross out, sure. Just trying to read through a couple more comments here. Okay, this one says some of the selections have selections that really don't seem applicable. So I think what that person's trying to maybe say is some of the exercises have selections that don't seem applicable, meaning I'm trying to interpret from the comment here that maybe some of the ones or twos and the descriptors that come after them don't seem applicable. And she also agrees that the score sheet could be shorter as well. I might need a little bit more context on that to be able to respond, because as far as I understand, and I don't do intensive score sheet review, but we do get a variety of those ones and twos selected. It's not as though some descriptors only show up and others don't. Sorry, all. There's just a lot coming in, so I'm trying to. Okay, so here's a good one. We have handlers ask us, why do we need to do a stay with the 10-foot lead when we are not allowed to ever get our animal that far away from us? What would be your good answer? That's a great question. What I always say, and I've heard some evaluators do in their quote unquote script when they're setting up this exercise, is they'll say, you should never be detached from your animal during a visit. However, accidents do happen. And we want to know that if one of these accidents happen and you become separated from your animal, will your animal reliably, do what you ask it to do. We have had situations, and this was a scary one, where the handler got on the elevator and the door closed so quickly that he had to let go of the leash. So the dog was actually on a different floor. So obviously he couldn't even call him. But these types of things happen. We've also had somebody with medical equipment somehow move between the handler and the animal unexpectedly, and that causes the leash to drop to the ground. We want to be able to know the animal is going to come back. But that's how we always set it up. This shouldn't happen, but in an emergency, it might. How will your animal react? That's how we set it up. Somebody says, awkward situation. What do you recommend when you have an overbearing handler who is super dominant with a great dog? The interference being the handler feels they know better than the evaluator, but the dog is fine. What do you do even if they do all of the exercises properly? Well, overbearing can mean a lot of different things. I mean, obviously, a handler could be NR if that overbearing behavior crosses certain lines, where they're treating their animal really unfairly. If they just have a, I don't know how to better put this, a gruff demeanor where, they do have a know-it-all attitude, that might not be enough to NR them, but it is something you could put in your comments and in your feedback at the end of the session that, your animal may not need that type of direction from you. Or just so you know, clients tend to like when handlers speak a little bit more positively to their animals. Things like that you could put in the feedback. But certainly overbearing, if it becomes to the point where it's tugging too hard on the animal's leash or things like that, can result in an NR. So you'll want to consider that. Another person chimed in that they agreed on shortening the score sheet. Again, I would love to know more about how you would suggest doing that. Because, of course, wouldn't we all? I would say even staff would love to have the score sheet shorter. It would be less for us to look at, but we really need to get an accurate view of the team. And so is it that you want fewer twos and ones to choose from? Is it you don't want the comment section? Is it that you actually think exercises should be dropped, which that probably won't happen? I'll be honest about that because these exercises have been developed over the years with a lot of careful consideration. So you don't have to type it in the comments right now, but you can email me after this if you want. I'm at jessieh@petpartners.org, and let me know what you actually think should be cut because I'd love to know. Just scrolling through here. So more on the length of score sheets. So it sounds like, you understand that there needs to be a long score sheet, but a lone evaluator feels stressed when there's so much to do on a sheet. So one thing I would suggest, and I understand that this isn't always easy, so I'm not offering this as a solution to everybody. You can use a scribe, and a scribe does not need to be a licensed evaluator. That could possibly help you. So I suggest going to the manual and reading about scribes and how one can become a scribe. And maybe if you're doing an all-day evaluation that's 6 or 7 hours, maybe the scribe can't stay the whole time. But if they can come help you out during your busiest part of the day with those score sheets, you might feel a little bit less stressed. So one person suggested shortening the score sheet by having a comment section only at the end, not with each skill, might be better. Okay, that's one thing to consider. I will lodge that in our queue. Okay, somebody said, I felt in my limited experience that the score sheet felt long because the time felt quick. Can the evaluations be scheduled for 1.5 hours? So no, your time with the team should not extend past 45 minutes. And that's because it just gets to be too long. So I'm not sure if you're asking, can you make 1.5 hour slots per team, even if you don't, some of that time is used for you to review score sheets. You certainly could. Generally, like I said, most people are able to do these evaluations in, about 35 to 40 minutes, a couple minutes to review their score sheets and to give the score. But you're absolutely allowed to structure your day however you want. So if you need a bigger break between the two of them to get your paperwork in order, you're certainly welcome to do that. Some things that evaluators do too is the morning of their evaluation or the evening before, they fill out all the score sheets with the names of the teams, the species, all that stuff at the top that you can fill out ahead of time. You could even date certain things And then that way, that's less stuff you have to be writing that day. I know it seems inconsequential, but if every 30 seconds or every minute counts, that's one way to do it. I'm scrolling back up to see what I missed here. Karen, I see that you have one question about the stay and the come. I'm not 100% sure what the question is, so I will follow up with you individually on that one, okay? I just made a note of it. I just don't want to confuse others if I ask a question wrong. Okay, and then one person is answering my question about, so somebody made a comment earlier that some of the ones and twos in the descriptors below each exercise, somebody said those don't always make sense. Somebody gave an example and said, on the exercise 4 for the appearance and grooming on the handler side, that should be different. You were asking about their appearance and grooming, and the answers do not make sense for the handler, and that should be changed. Okay, I'll take a look at those. I see what you're saying. I wonder too if some of the rationale is, by keeping some of the 1 and 2 descriptors the same for evaluators, your eyes sort of know what's coming, right? So if each one has a vastly different set of 1s and 2s, now you got to reread each exercise to make sure you're circling the right one. Whereas if the first number 2 is always the same or nearly always the same, then you know what you're circling. I wonder if that has something to do with it. Because imagine if each descriptor was different and you always had to be really careful. But I'll take a look at the appearance and grooming one because I do think you're right about that. We're almost done here. This is our last slide here, so obviously we've already been moving on to other questions, but this is an opportunity. I'll stay on for another 2-3 minutes if there are additional questions about what came up here. So again, I would love to know what mistakes of these that we talked about do you feel like you make the most often or that you're worried about making? I think we kind of skipped over that. So one person said here, time savers. In addition to pre-completing the evaluation forms before the evaluation day, this person also collects paperwork a week before so I can already have read them over. This is a big time saver for me. We certainly think it's okay to request paperwork. What we think people should be a little careful about is if somebody doesn't turn their handler's questionnaire in 7 days before, telling them they don't get a slot. I know that there's valid reasons for that. I know that evaluators will say, well, if they can't get me paperwork, then they aren't being a responsible volunteer. I understand all of the arguments. I just want you to consider that there are some barriers there that we are creating when we're doing that. And also, what is the reaction going to be afterwards? So they got that slot. They missed your email asking for the handler questionnaire. Now they show up and you're not going to let them evaluate. They've driven 90 minutes. There's not another evaluation for 3 months. Is it worth that? Or is it worth saying, yes, I request this. I encourage it. It's easier for me. It's easier for you. But if you show up without it, we'll let you complete that one the day of. It's just something to consider. So one person said the biggest mistake they make is not filling out the score sheets properly. Too many questions to answer, even though I go after and try to be careful, but I'm always too rushed with the team stacked up. So this might be a situation where maybe if you schedule 6 teams in a day, make it only 5 and give yourself a little bit of time between each team. I know that's hard to turn people away or to make less slots available, but we also want to be protective of your time and your sanity. And if giving yourself 10 minutes between teams or 15 minutes between teams to make sure you're doing what you need to do, all the better. This kind of goes with a scribe as well, which is one recommendation I made earlier. But even if you don't have a scribe, you kind of ask your role player, any old role player that's sitting right there, say, here's my score sheet. Well, I'm getting ready for the next team. Will you take a look at that? Make sure that I circled a number for each animal, or excuse me, a number for each exercise in the animal and the handler side and an overall score. Will you just give me a second set of eyes? They can tell you, hey, look, on exercise 4, you didn't score for the handler. And they can tell you, you're not asking for their input. You're asking for them to just check that you've done it all. So that's another option. Second set of eyes can go really far. Somebody said, sometimes I forget to circle carried versus floor. Yes, I can understand that. Obviously, if it's a German Shepherd dog and you forgot to do that, not a huge deal. We won't even follow up with you. If it's a breed that kind of falls in the middle, sometimes we ask, but that's, not the end of the world. But thank you for pointing it out. That can be an easy one to miss, especially if you're doing non-carried dogs all day and then all of a sudden you got a carried one at the end and you sort of forgot to do that part. So more stuff coming in. So the person who mentioned that they collect paperwork a week before, so if they don't get that paperwork, they request a week before. They just continue to follow up closely with the handler. And again, that's not a bad thing. Just pointing out that we just want to be careful about how much turning away at the door we're doing for things like, the handler's questionnaire or things of that nature. And that's all that's coming in. So I'm going to wrap this up. You can use the contact us link from the website for any questions not answered, any general questions. But like I said, I know that the big topic was length of score sheets here. If you have comments on that specifically, you can email me directly at jesseh, that's JESSEH, at petpartners.org. And that's all I have for today. So thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.